Okay, according to Mr. Verizon, it's 7 o'clock, so I'd like to call the Findlay City Council June 2nd, 2020 meeting to order. First order of business is roll call.
Mr. Greeno?
Here.
Mr. Haas?
Here.
Mr. Hellman?
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Here.
Mr. Palmer?
Here.
Mr. Russell?
Here.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Here.
Mr. Slough?
Here.
Ms. Warnicki?
Here.
And Mr. Wobser?
Present.
We all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen. I'll entertain a motion to accept or change the May 19th public hearing minutes. Mr. Slapp.
I would move that to adopt the minutes of the public hearing for 701 through 807 Adams Street and 700 through 714 Putnam Street rezoned.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. Any comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The minutes are approved. I'll entertain a motion to accept or change the May 19th public hearing for ordinance number 2020-026. Mr. Slapp.
Move to adopt the public hearing minutes for the zoning text amendments.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of acceptance say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? Minutes are accepted. Entertain a motion to accept the May 20th regular session of City Council minutes. Mr. Slough.
Move to adopt the minutes from the May 19th regular session of council.
Mr. Palmer, second. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of accepting the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The ayes have it. We have no add-ons, replacements, or removals from, oh, I'm sorry, we do have a couple. Mr. Russell.
Yes, we have two add-ons. We have an add-on letter from Hancock Regional Planning Commission from Matt Cordonier concerning the City of Findlay's revolving loan fund for public infrastructure, which we have legislation about tonight. And we have a letter from Blanchard Valley Health Systems from Bridget Mundy, Director of Residential Care at Blanchard Valley Continuing Care Services, also concerning the same legislation for the public infrastructure. And I would move that these both get added to the written communications portion of our agenda.
Second, Mr. Slough. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of adding the two items to tonight's agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The ayes have it. We have no proclamations, no recognition, retirements, or retirement resolutions. We have one oral communication. Tim Miley would like to speak. You have 4 minutes.
Got it.
I understand you have a handout. I'll start when those are.
Thanks.
You got Yep.
Got it?
Yep.
Need one more?
Yep. I passed them all out so I wouldn't have to read.
Ready to roll?
Yeah, go.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me tonight and allowing me to speak in favor of the resolution that's going to come later on this evening. And really just wanted to walk through this paperwork quickly. Happy to answer any questions afterwards. Everybody should have a copy of it. So it's Resolution 17-2020. And the purpose of this is to utilize revolving loan funding. It's revolving loan fund money as a grant to the City of Findlay to bid and install a publicly owned and operated infrastructure. So the project is for out at Birchhaven. It's a 50-unit senior citizen residential project, which aligns with what we're trying to do in economic development on residential for a whole wide variety of reasons. And actually, this project came before council in 2018 for a rezone. Some of you may remember that, and then it went quiet for a couple of years. They were going through some financing pieces, which I'd be happy to answer questions on. But last week, there were some very important meetings, which is why we're here tonight. Revolving Loan Fund Board approved a grant to the city of Findlay to install a public water line. So that's what we're here to ask for you to approve that grant from regional planning to the city of Findlay. And the most important part is, I know there's some emergency legislation tied to this. That does two different things. It, one, allows Matt's office under, I think the resolution actually said by the mayor, so it could be Brian Thomas, it could be Matt Cordonier, to go ahead and bid this work. It also allows some mitigation for lending because they plan to close on the property June 16th. The nice piece about this from the city council perspective, and the auditor's office was very wise how they decided to do this, appropriation comes later on. So they're not asking you to appropriate any money this evening. They're asking you to allow Matt's office to bid out the work, align it with the construction time frame, move forward, and then after environmental review, the closing of the property, and they know the cost, they'll come back and ask for an appropriation from council at a later point. They do plan to close June 16th. They'd like to start mobilization and site work shortly thereafter, and then we'll be coming back to council if this follows through sometime this summer for the appropriation. So there's some information there for you to read about the project. I had the opportunity to speak to most of you yesterday, so I'm not going to take up my 4 minutes. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of this and ask that it would be approved on an emergency basis. Thank you.
Any questions from council? Mr. Wilson.
Tim, are you going to be around when we get to this legislation to
I'll
answer
stick
our
around.
questions?
Sure.
I think it'd be more appropriate because we've got that. We've got 4 others to talk about with the RLF.
Yeah, I'll
We're
stick
going
around.
to talk about them all at the same time.
No problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Petitions.
A zoning amendment request for 253, 251, and 0 Madison Avenue from Eric Emery on behalf of Tuckerman Development LLC and owner Douglas Averish of BDA Properties LLC to change the zoning to C2 General Commercial. It's currently zoned R2 Single Family Medium Density.
Questions or comments? Petition to be referred to the City Planning Commission and the Planning and Zoning Committee. Written communications.
A letter from Third Ward Councilwoman Beth Warnicki for the RLF board report.
Mr. Wilson.
I'd like that this be read into the minutes, please. Need a second.
Do I hear a second? Mr. Russell, second. Please read that into the record. Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please read that into the record. Thank you.
As a Findlay City Council representative to the City of Findlay Revolving Loan Fund Board, I am submitting the below update on our board's most recent actions. Summary of most recent meeting of board. The RLF board met virtually on May 27, 2020 to review the 5 applications for the new $10,000 Findlay Business Catalyst Loan Program. There was also a request for a grant of $100,000 to the Penrose Group for Infrastructure in Eastern Woods for low-income housing. Loan applications were from Rhubarb Studios, Findlay Brewing Company, Objects of Desire Artful Living, branded by Martina LLC, Dr. Trina Reed DPM. All applications and requests were approved with the exception of Objects of Desire Artful Living, which did not meet the low income levels required for the loan. Please do not hesitate to contact me with any questions you may have related to this report or my representation on the RLF board.
Comments? Letter to be filed?
I think Mr. Wilson had a question.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Wobser.
Beth, thank you for this letter and what you've done. It's obviously going to play a part of our discussion tonight. Question for you on the objects of desire, the reason that they did not said that did not meet the low income levels required for the loan. So a business, if they do what, so much in sales, what's the low income bar that they did not qualify for?
They're further to you.
Would you like me to?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Matt. I'm sorry, Beth.
He would probably be better, because I had questions on that afterwards. There was apples and oranges. Some people didn't give you their personal income, some did.
Okay.
But they have to circle a number on the front of the application page
Okay.
that they have. I don't have one in front of me. You know, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. And the owner of Objects Desire circled the very last one, which is above the limit of the loan. It is above the limits of what qualifies to be able to do this loan.
Okay.
So the loans are for job retention. If you have no employees, then you are, the owner is the job retention, and the owner has to be low to moderate income.
Would you repeat that, Matt, one more time?
It's for
I'm sorry.
job retention.
Okay.
So the companies that have employees often have an easier time meeting that low to moderate income standard. Their employees have to be low to moderate income. 51% of their employees, for the one job that they're retaining, has to be a person that's low to moderate income.
Were these loans related to the CARES Act, or is this strictly right out of your loan that you would normally do this anyway?
Those are HUD's guidelines. Those are the guidelines of the revolving loan fund. Normally, sole proprietor owners are not, their job as the owner is not counted as job creation or retention. But HUD and the state of Ohio changed the regulations during these times that the owner can count.
So would these folks also qualify for and I'm saying CARES Act, I believe that's correct, Mayor, correct me if I'm wrong. For the loan that they can get was also for retention of employees from the feds.
I can't speak to the CARES Act per se. This is just our standard revolving loan fund.
Okay.
But we did package it for $10,000 loans, quicker access, quicker turnaround.
Understood. Mayor, please.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll just provide a little additional clarification. So obviously there is a lot of federal and state support going out to businesses right now in a variety of forms, some directly through state, some through the federal funding through the CARES Act. Some of the businesses have already applied for that and received it. For example, the PPP, Payment Protection Program, which was focused on covering payroll costs associated and retaining employees so that they're not going on unemployment. As a reminder, the Business Catalyst loan that we established is focused on allowing specifically for working capital, understanding that businesses who have been keeping employees have perhaps not been operating or were deemed non-essential, or restaurants that have stayed open but have obviously seen a dramatic decrease in revenue. We wanted to support them and make sure that as they are continuing and trying to implement especially the safety measures that are being required of them, and their revenue has still not picked back up, that we're providing them an opportunity to help support them. The revolving loan fund dollars are received, as Matt mentioned, through HUD and CDBG, Community Block Grant Development dollars, that then are managed by Hancock Regional Planning. The loan that all of the loans that have been received, except for Objects of Desire, were ones where they were focused on or had to continue to represent that they were retaining jobs, that they were making additional investment in the community. The reason Objects of Desire did not qualify under the guidelines for the revolving loan fund dollars was because it was like one single employee, the sole proprietor for that business. And so he just didn't qualify with some of the income restrictions. So he's been very understanding, still continuing to operate and support the business, but didn't qualify. But I know it is has been very beneficial, and the businesses that have applied and were recommended from RLF and that are before you this evening are very excited to receive those dollars and continue to make improvements to be able to operate in the city of Findlay.
Mr. Wilson.
And these are loans subject to the same repayment that we generally see when we have RLF loans.
Correct. So the recommendation of the loan that is from the revolving loan fund board is it would be 6 months interest fee, and then after that it's 1% below prime. So they're low interest loans, but that does go back. Oh, never mind. I'm evidently saying something wrong. Yes, Matt.
6 months deferred payment, so they don't make their first payment for 6 months.
Okay.
0% interest on the loan.
Okay,
5 year.
For 5
for 5 years, yeah, so these were a little bit
Which is standard for
different.
most of the RLF loans, is that correct, Matt?
No.
No?
A standard revolving loan fund before the COVID virus was 1% below prime.
Okay.
Yeah, so the standard loans, my apologies, the standard loans were the one that I just described, the 0% for 6 months and then the 1% below prime. What we've done for the catalytic loans is 6 months deferred payments and then 0 interest after that.
Any other questions for Matt or the mayor? Hearing none, written communication will be filed. Reports of municipal officers and municipal departments. Oh,
You have the
I'm
We
sorry.
have the add-ons.
2 other add-ons, I'm sorry.
The letter from Blanchard Valley Health Systems Director Bridget Mundy. Regarding the, I'm sorry,
Good.
yeah, regarding the RLF for Penrose.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
You got one to be added as that?
Second one, 2 of them.
I thought that would be written. Letter from Hancock Regional Planning Commission Director Matt Cordonier regarding legislation authorizing the use of City of Findlay revolving loan fund for public infrastructure.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed. That it? Reports of municipal officers and municipal departments.
Letter from Hancock Regional Planning Commission Director Matt Cordonier regarding City of Findlay revolving loan fund request for appropriations of the Rhubarb Studios Ltd.
Questions or comments? I think for brevity, I think I'll have Matt come up. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7 letters. Explain what the letters are doing. They all seem to be the same amount, 10, other than the last one. So you want to speak to all of them? I know there's a
Yeah,
question on a
ordinances
couple.
2020-64 through 2020-67. Those are the appropriation of the $10,000 for each of those loans. As we mentioned, those went through the revolving loan fund board last week. I do request that we pass on an emergency basis and waive the 3 readings. The closings for those 4 loans are set for this Friday. And the purpose is to get the money to the businesses as quickly as possible. And then resolution number 14, 2020, that is an authorization for the mayor to allow regional planning to apply for CDBG funds on behalf of the city of Findlay. And that is for a sewer line, televising and lining if necessary for Broad Avenue, Rockwell Avenue, Clifton Avenue, and many other avenues and roads. And the application is due June 17th, and for that reason I request that we pass on an emergency basis and waive the 3 readings. We were notified on April 21st of the fund availability, and we worked with the engineering department to create the project. So the state gives us a short timeline, unfortunately, and so we have to hurry along. Are there any questions?
Yeah, real
Mr.
quick.
Allen.
Yes, sir.
This has to be in their office by the 17th?
That's
It
correct.
can't be postmarked the 17th, is that correct?
We don't like to cut it that close.
I understand, I've been in that position. All right.
If there's any further questions, just a second, Mayor. If there's any further questions after we read each letter, Matt's available to answer all. Ms. Mayor.
I was just gonna comment and remind folks that obviously one of the things that we've been talking about is how can we leverage federal and state dollars to get projects done that we know we need to be doing. Taking care and maintaining our infrastructure is not glamorous. It's not something that people notice until it goes bad. And this is one of the areas, some of the streets that we mentioned, Bolton, Clifton, some of those areas are ones that we have been mentioning that we talked about at the last meeting, where we're starting to see some of that water infiltration and some of those backups that are occurring. So that's one of the areas that we want to get a better understanding of what the issues are and how we can get that addressed before it becomes a larger issue. So that's one of the reasons that we're specifically paying attention to that area with this project.
Any further questions? Okay, so Denise read the letter concerning ordinance 2020-064. Any further questions or comments on that letter? Letter to be filed.
Letter from HRPC Director Matt Cordania regarding City of Findlay revolving loan fund for appropriations for Findlay Brewing Company LLC.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
HRPC Director Matt Cordania for City of Findlay revolving loan fund request for appropriations for Branded by Martina LLC.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from HRPC Matt Cordania regarding City of Findlay revolving loan fund request for appropriation for TC Reed DPM LLC.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from HRPC Matt Cordania regarding commitment of matching CDBG grant funds.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from HRPC Matt Cordania regarding revolving loan fund for public infrastructure for Penrose Senior Living Facility.
Questions or comments? Mr. Wilson,
I'd like to ask if that be read into the minutes, please.
we have a motion to read this into the record. Do I hear a second? Mr. Russell, second. All those in favor of reading this into the record, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Please read it into the record.
On May 27th, the City of Findlay Revolving Loan Fund Board approved a public infrastructure grant in support of Penrose LLC. The grant will use City of Findlay Revolving Loan Fund dollars to construct up to $100,000 of public infrastructure for the proposed senior living facility. Penrose LLC has proposed a 50-unit senior living facility located in the Birch Haven development. The public infrastructure project will be administered by HRPC and publicly bid through the City of Findlay. Before City Council is a request authorizing the use of up to $100,000 of Findlay Revolving Loan Fund dollars for public infrastructure related to the Penrose Senior Living Facility. I respectfully request that this legislation be adopted through emergency procedures and 3 readings requirement be waived.
Questions or comments? Mr. Hellman.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, and I don't know if Matt is going to give a presentation, and maybe I can speak after that, or speak when the ordinance, ask the questions when the ordinance comes up for adoption. Either way.
I was not planning a presentation, but I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. I just wanted to comment. I guess this gave me a lot of heartburn when I first saw it, and after speaking with Tim, several others, it is a lot clearer. One of the things, there were several things. One is the building a water line, the city building and paying for a water line on private property. And after speaking with Brian Thomas, I guess in this community anyways, it's fairly common. And we've done it many times in the past. I had not run into that very often before, but I guess it is something that we do.
It is, yes.
And the reason it gave me heartburn is because the city is going to be obligated to maintain that line then for the rest of its life, correct?
Correct.
So if a water line freezes or breaks, it's not the responsibility of the developer or the complex owner. It is our staff or contractor that goes out and fixes it.
But it's a public water line, so it's like all the other water lines in the city. This isn't a private tap-in. This is actually a public water line. So the converse is true, is that anyone in the development can use that water line.
Yeah.
And we anticipate that there will be other users in the future that will tap in and benefit from this water line, allowing more development in the Eastern Woods subdivision.
And that apparently doesn't give you or Brian or smelter a problem. And I guess with that having been said or learned today, I guess I'm okay with that then.
Yeah, I mean, there will be an easement recorded, and the city will always have access to the water line, and whether it's located on private property or in the public right-of-way, it's still treated the same. It's still a public water line that the city maintains.
Okay. But in a normal situation, wouldn't the water line that's going down a public right-of-way is the responsibility of the developer to put it in and pay for it, and then he deeds it over to the city? If this were a regular subdivision or a regular tap, we're not doing that in this case, correct?
That is the traditional scenario, yes.
And then the $100,000 that the revolving loan fund, this is not a loan, as you
Correct.
typically think
It's a
of an
grant,
RLF.
yes.
It's a grant. And that also gave me concern, and I just want to verify that I understand it correct. The amount of money in the revolving loan fund is rather significant that has not been spent.
Correct, and the revolving loan fund balance really ebbs and flows. Before the coronavirus, we were not seeing a lot of loan requests, which usually means people are getting financing through the banks just fine. We see a higher amount of usage in the revolving loan fund when businesses are not getting all the money that they need from banks, and that there's a lot of different factors that play into that. The balance is $659,000. We set aside $300,000 for the catalyst loans, which means we could do 30 catalyst loans. We could do this infrastructure grant, and then we would still have $259,000 remaining in the revolving loan fund. Approximately $7,000 a month gets paid back into the loan fund from the outstanding loans that are out in the field. Additionally, in the CARES Act, there was $100 million in the first round of the CARES Act. There was $100 million set aside for CDBG in the state of Ohio. 73 million of that goes to the larger counties, the larger cities. Those are called entitlement cities. 23 million of that is set aside for non-entitlement communities, which the city of Findlay and Hancock County are one. So that $27 million, they haven't put together all the details on it, but the state has indicated that the majority of that will be for economic development loans and for homelessness prevention. So if we use up the money in our revolving loan fund, we will have a resource to loan out additional loans through that program. Now, is it 100% foolproof that that will be there? But there will be a lot of competition for those funds. Conversely, we are not eligible for any of those funds if we can pay for it with our revolving loan fund.
Okay. And then one last thing, I guess. So the state would encourage you to spend your own money first rather than applying for
Yes.
more state money to stick in our coffers.
Correct.
Okay. And then
To the point, if we submitted a competitive CDBG loan, they would tell us, that's great, we're not giving you grant money, use your revolving loan fund on that infrastructure project rather than us giving you additional grant money. The state is receiving a lot of pressure from HUD to get the revolving loan fund balances down below approximately $100,000. They said it's a science, not or it's an art form, not a science. So they want it a lot lower, and they can force us to make it a lot lower.
And as I understand it, that's what's happened here. They are one of the reasons why we're giving this as a grant as
No.
opposed to a loan, because they want you to spend down that $650, whatever it was.
No, I think the merits of the grant stand upon themselves.
Okay.
I think we have been, I would say the timing is good, but the merits of it stand on itself in that, we're achieving opening up more land for development. We're supporting one of our greatest needs, which is housing, and we're doing it by putting in public infrastructure. So, but I'm careful. If we spend our money, great. If we don't, that's fine too.
And is there a possibility that they would ask you to send some of that money back?
No.
Okay.
They will never ask you to send it back. They just will always look for opportunities to say, instead of this grant, use your revolving loan fund money.
Mr. Wobson.
Thank you.
Yep.
Matt, we've got the 4 loans that we just talked about for 10 grand. We've got this grant for $100,000. And they're both coming from the same entity, the RLF. Can you explain a little bit of difference why we're loaning money to the small businesses, but yet we're granting, as in we're giving the money to Penrose, although it's not going directly to Penrose, it's going to be used for infrastructure. So how does the RLF board have the ability to do loans and grants?
A lot of it's through the guidance of the state. We cannot grant money to a company per se. That was a discussion that was had as part of the Catalyst loan. If we could make part of it forgivable, the state clearly said, no, you cannot grant revolving loan fund dollars to a company. You can use revolving loan fund for infrastructure that benefits a population of greater than 51% low to moderate income individuals. So with the revolving loan fund, we could install water lines, we could install sidewalks, we could repair a bridge. We could do any type of infrastructure as long as the people using that infrastructure are 51% low to moderate income.
It's my understanding that this will be senior living.
Correct.
So 51% of what they're building here have to be low to moderate income seniors.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Well, and I believe the state tax credit, system has greater requirements than 51%. But so being a state tax credit project, it's going to exceed the standards that we have to meet. But it meets the standard of at least 51% low to moderate income.
You mentioned that we have too much money in this fund, that you need to spend it down so that you can get it replenished. That seems to be I've heard that from Tim, I've heard that from you. Is that correct, or am I off base there? Did I misunderstand?
The state will not take it away. At the same time, we will not get new grant dollars. We will not get new competitive grant dollars unless it's spent down. So I don't mean to split hairs. I think that sounds a little aggressive, like we're looking for ways to spend it down. This project's been in the works for a long time, and this discussion has, I've been having discussions about this since February, So, and there's no penalty for not spending it down, but at the same time, there's 27 million, and in part 2, they expect the total allocation to be $60 million for our community. So I don't have fear of getting a lower balance because we can replenish it at this time easier than we've ever been able to replenish it.
So you're certain we're going to be able to replenish this grant money?
What they will say is we will pass on our loans to the state, and they will approve the loan, give the loan to a local business in Findlay or Hancock County, and that loan will be paid back to us, thus bolstering the revolving loan fund.
Why would we not make the 4 $10,000 request grants?
Because the state will not approve it. It will not allow us.
So we can't give money directly to a business who's asking for it, but we can give it to somebody building, we can use it to build something else.
We can use it for public infrastructure.
Okay, just want to make sure the difference there.
Sure.
Mr. Schindlepicker.
Matt, has our local revolving loan fund ever given a grant as opposed to loans in the past?
Yes.
Can you give an example?
The county revolving loan fund lent Partitions Plus $400,000 And then they granted $100,000 for infrastructure to get to the building. I think that was achieving a goal of our community for job creation, and I view this project as meeting a goal of creating more housing opportunities. Different goals, but both goals.
And Matt, I mean, that grant and on that case as well as on this one, the grant was given to the city so that they could build the infrastructure to get there.
In the case of Partitions Plus, very similar to this, the county bid it out and constructed it.
So it was a public entity.
Yeah, so we administered it on behalf of the county signed the contracts.
Okay.
The same way that we will administer it and the city of Findlay will sign the contracts to build the water line.
Thank you.
Mr. Wilson.
Matt, normally we would not do this for a developer, correct? Normally, as Councilman Hellman asked you earlier, developer wants to develop a new apartment complex, they would pay for the initial infrastructure costs, correct?
Correct. At the same time, there are not, especially in residential housing, there are few opportunities where these loans, this fund would be eligible because of the 51% low to moderate income. For example, could we help a single family subdivision? Not practically, because 51% of those homeowners would have to be low to moderate income. So in housing, there are very few opportunities to use this.
Why would we not look at this as why wouldn't we just put the infrastructure in, put the water and sewer in with our own money, and then just charge them a fee over time to get the money back?
I don't
versus
know.
giving them the infrastructure for free.
I think that goes into kind of the financing of it.
Mr.
Financing of
Schmelz
what?
is going to have a comment on that.
I would not want to get in the business of cash flowing or funding private development projects.
But isn't that what we're doing, Paul?
No.
No?
Not for projects that aren't part of the guidelines. So the answer to your question was, why don't we give people money and have them pay us back? We're essentially fronting the loan.
Yeah,
We're fronting that development cost.
exactly.
At what interest rate and to who, how much money are we going to use for what kind of projects? That's a whole different can of worms than what Matt is talking about with guidelines that are already in place. When he says there aren't very many projects that are eligible, it's because this property is actually essentially contractually obligated to select from a select lease group based on age. You rarely see that. You see that only in senior living. And so I'm not sure it goes as far as a deed restriction, but the restrictions are very, very stringent with regard to who they can lease to, typically for somewhere between 20 and 30 years. That's why this property is eligible for RLF.
So if it wasn't for the fact that this is going to be senior living, low income senior living, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Correct. In my opinion.
Okay.
I don't know a whole lot about this, but I've gone through a bunch of those senior living projects, and on the private side and here, the requirements are very stringent. There are age requirements, and in some cases, stringent income requirements. So I don't know the specifics here, but that's why this is eligible for a grant.
Okay. Tim, do you want to?
Yeah, I can. So Paul's absolutely correct, everything he said, but in addition to the age requirement, which is 55 and older, there's a 30-year requirement for income requirement, and it's a 60% average mean income, which I think is around 51,000 in our community's average mean income. So people who can qualify to rent there would have to have $30-some thousand in income, not in assets, but income. So you got to imagine someone's going to be retired who's living out there, and that's a 30-year. And the reason that that happens is the state of Ohio in 2019 basically incentivized the developer and offered them the tax credit and then requires them to cap the rent. So that way we have an opportunity for senior citizens who are retiring in our community who can afford to live in the community.
So this developer, Tim, is also getting tax credits for building this also from the state.
That's correct, from the Ohio Housing Finance Agency.
Okay, so they're gonna get tax credits from the state to start with, plus we're gonna give them additional, and I say give, we're gonna build them $100,000 worth of infrastructure for nothing.
That's correct.
Grant them that.
Well, and as my letter, we plan a phase 2, hopefully to follow shortly after this, and then there should be a phase 3 that would come along. That would, as Matt said, that would be for the future developers.
And I appreciate that. I didn't have a chance to read through all your details because it was given to us pretty late. But so in phase 2 and 3, since we use this grant money for this low-income senior living, does that mean phase 2 and 3 will be the same?
They would use the same water line. That water line is designed for that capacity.
Understood, but does that have to be the same income brackets?
It's all
Housing.
depending if they go through the Ohio Housing Finance. Phase 2 is intended, they would like to have registered nurses and STNAs to be able to live on campus at Birchhaven. So that is their next intended phase, is to allow medical people to live on campus. That's, I don't know if that qualifies for a tax credit or not, because as Matt said, it's all depending on income level. But that's phase 2 plan.
Thank you, Tim, for staying around and answering questions.
Sure.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, letter to be filed.
City Planning Commission agenda for June 11th, 2020, as well as the minutes of May 14th, 2020.
Questions or comments? Agenda and minutes to be filed. Committee reports.
Water and Sewer Committee met on May 21st, 2020 via Zoom to discuss water meter transmitter project updates.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the committee report say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. Committee report is adopted. Legislation.
First reading for Resolution 15, 2020, a resolution approving the expenditures made by the Auditor's Office on the attached list of vouchers which either exceed the purchase order or were incurred without a purchase order, exceeding the statutory limit of $3,000, all in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 5705.41D.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 15-2020.
Second, Mr. Wobser. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of resolution number 015-2020 say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 16, 2020, a resolution authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to file an application for fiscal year 2020 Community Development Block Grant Funds.
Mr. Russell.
Move that council statutory rules be suspended and resolution 016-2020 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this its second and third reading.
Resolution 16, 2020. Resolution 16, 2020.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 16-2020.
Second, Mr. Haas. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the resolution say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Haas.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 17, 2020. A resolution authorizing the use of City of Findlay revolving loan fund dollars for the construction of public infrastructure and authorizing the mayor of the City of Findlay, Ohio to advertise for bids.
Mr. Hellman.
I'd like to move that the statutory rules be suspended and ordinance number, what was it, 17-2020, be given its second and third reading.
Mr. Slough, second. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Nay.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Wobser,
Nay.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Was that five or nay?
8-2.
8-2.
Well, I wasn't done, but I didn't
I'm
understand
sorry.
what he said. Was it
I
nay?
said aye.
It was an aye.
He's a
Mr.
four.
Hellman,
Aye.
I apologize.
Nope. The ayes have it. The rules of council have been adopted to suspend this ordinance, I'm sorry, this resolution, and the clerk will give it its second and third reading.
Resolution 17, 2020, Resolution 17, 2020.
Mr. Slack.
I would move for adoption of Resolution 17-2020.
I
Ms.
just want to
Warren?
make a comment, I don't want a second.
Okay. What- okay,
Sorry, I
just a
didn't know
second.
we had to make all
Do I
the
hear a
comments.
second? Second, Mr. Hellman. Comments? Ms.
Sorry.
Warnicki.
I was interested in the discussion that went on before. I was at the board meeting, obviously on the RLF fund. I did vote against this based on some of the comments that I've heard tonight. I want to have the money there to support small business, and since all those are loans, I didn't understand why this couldn't be a loan. I did talk to Matt Cordanier yesterday and asked him if this could have been a loan, and he said that it could have been. My other issue with it, I guess, was, they're coming to us as council to watch our budget, watch our spending with everything going on, and you've got a $9 million project going in out there, which has been funded by tax credits and this, that, and the other. Just asking us to give them another $100,000, and that yet they're going to get the rent money from this project once it's built. I just felt that out of a $9 million project, they could cut the $100,000 somewhere and pay for this themselves.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Wilson.
I appreciate Council Ladies Warnicki's comments on this. I struggle with this too for a couple of reasons. Number one, for the reason that it's an unusual situation that we're being asked to approve here on short notice. It'd been much better if we could have let this run its 3 readings, but we're told that they've got to have it done tonight. And because for some reason this has been going on for how long, Tim? They've been working on this project?
I think you approved the rezone in 2018.
2018, but yet we've got to have this done in 24 hours. Doesn't give us much time to review it. One of the things that we have to continue to do, and we do a good job of using state funds when they come to us in grants and whatnot, but we got to continue to remember that those state funds are taxpayer dollars also. And as Councilman Warnicki said, Council Lady Warnicki, excuse me, a $9 million project, and they're asking for $100,000 from us to put this, really, from what I'd heard, is really, it should be less than 100, somewhere around $88,000 to put in this infrastructure. So I struggle with this quite honestly too, and I'd be interested to hear other council folks' thoughts on this before we vote.
Mr. Schindelbecker.
I voted against suspending the rules. I will vote for this project. I would have been much more comfortable. I understand with financial situation and the stock market and virus and everything else that the finances and so on are up and down just about every day. I would have been much more comfortable if this was just sprung on us tonight to give it a first reading, come back next week and suspend the rules, or at the next meeting and suspend the rules, but we're talking about a matter of a couple of days. I'll vote for it, but I'm not happy that it has been sent to us in such a late date.
Mr. Russell.
I received notice about this with my packet on Friday, not today. And when I looked at the packet, that's when I got the first notification of it. And I understand, I agree that it would be nice in a perfect world to have given this 3 full readings and let it go the whole time. We're not in a perfect world, obviously, right now. supporting housing. Senior housing is something that I think is in the city's best interest. We have an opportunity to use money that has already been taxed and taken from the public and put it to use here in Findlay. And I think that is a proper use of these funds. It is legal, it is obviously, and I support it for those reasons.
Mr. Hellman.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I struggle with this as well and agree with those who have expressed those comments this evening, and that's why I spent quite a bit of time delving into this. The other concern that I have is setting a precedent that, you know, we're going to build infrastructure pieces for various developments, and I think that's a slippery slope to go down, because eventually you're going to have to tell people no, it doesn't qualify, or we've run out of money. So I guess I just warn us that we don't want to establish that kind of a procedure or precedent that any project that comes down the pike would qualify for a grant as opposed to a loan, or they first go to a bank to get it financed. That's all.
Mr. Russell.
As related to the slippery slope, Dennis, any project that meets the qualifications that moves the city of Findlay forward, I would look favorably on it. And once again, this has a specific need. Housing's been identified as a need for the city. In this particular case, it's a specific type of housing. This is public infrastructure. It meets qualifications for this type of funding from the feds and the state. I don't believe there's a slippery slope. And the next one that comes by that meets the criteria, I'd probably split that one too.
Ms. Mayor.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate something that you kind of touched on, Councilman Hellman, and that Councilman Russell touched on, is that there are very specific restrictions on these dollars, especially related to the income. And I know that Matt and Tim both touched on it, that there are even few areas within our community that we could use these dollars for infrastructure items. So that's something that we are regularly looking at, how we can invest these dollars and best leverage these dollars. And I would say that overall this is a great use for them. Not only is it going to help create additional housing for a needed population, it's also going to allow maybe some of those folks to free up other housing that is going to bring more people to our community, or provide opportunity for folks that are struggling to find housing right now. But it's very restrictive on where these specific dollars can be utilized, and so we want to make sure that we're utilizing them wisely. And we would bring obviously any project that qualifies, that's requesting them, to this body.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of, do we have a motion and a second? All those in favor of the ordinance or the resolution, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Nay.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Nay.
The resolution is adopted. Ordinances.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-051, an ordinance authorizing the service director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to advertise for bids and enter into a lease agreement or agreements to farm approximately 181 acres in the vicinity of the airport, approximately 64 acres in the vicinity of the reservoirs, and approximately 23 acres in the Carlin Street location, all owned by the city, and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2020-054, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-055, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-056, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2020-062, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2020-064, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Sleth.
I would move the statutory rules of council be suspended and ordinance 2020-064 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Statutory rules have been suspended, and the clerk will give this its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-064, ordinance 2020-064.
Mr. Sleth.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2020-064.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
And Mr. Russell?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-065, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2020-065.
I'm sorry, that's its first reading.
Suspend first.
Not either.
Suspend.
You'd have to either.
I'm sorry, suspend the rules of council and give the ordinance its second, third reading.
Second, Mr. Haas. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-065, ordinance 2020-065.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of the ordinance.
Second, Mr. Haas. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
And Mr. Slough?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-066, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Ms. Warnicki.
I would move that we suspend the rules of council and give ordinance 2020-66 its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
And Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
The rules are suspended, and the clerk will give this its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-066, ordinance 2020-066.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2020-066.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2020-067, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Slough.
I would move the statutory rules of council be suspended and ordinance 2020-067 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2020-067, ordinance 2020-067.
Mr. Greeno.
I move for adoption of ordinance 2020-067.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. Questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. That's it, the ordinance is adopted. Any old business? Any new business? Oh, they all got their hands up. I'll start with the
They
mayor.
can all go first, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Russell.
Planning and zoning meeting will be held June 11th at noon. It will once again be a virtual meeting.
Just when I learned how to do Zoom.
It will be a virtual meeting. You get to do it
You get to
again. New trick for the old dog.
Auditor Stashak, you had new business?
Move that we get new chairs in the gallery.
All maintenance. Good evening, everyone. Due to an oversight, I normally have a letter for you for this meeting every year. Wasn't able to get it to Denise on time, and I didn't want to have to make her do an add-on because I know how hard she works. This letter is to inform you I will be providing the estimated revenues for next fiscal year in your council packet for your meeting on July 7th, 2020. This is the first step required under Ohio budgetary law, and the figures are best estimates of what is expected in revenues over the next 18 months. In order to meet our statutory requirements for distribution of local government money, this document should be accepted by council at the July 7th meeting, so it can then be filed with the county auditor by no later than July 20th. A motion for acceptance of the revenue estimates will be needed during your meeting on July 7th. By copy of this letter, I've asked the council clerk to schedule a public hearing for the night before your meeting, notice of which must be published 10 days before the hearing, during which period 2 copies will be available for public inspection in my office. And again, that's standard business, and related to that, and it's part of creating that document, I have requested earlier this morning, I haven't heard back yet, but I'm hoping there are no issues, of the income tax administrator, and I've copied all the income tax board members. I'm asking, he's doing a wonderful job giving us weekly updates on what's happening with the tax. And as of today, when we recorded the receipts from his office, the tax was down 9% compared to last year, a little more than 9%. However, if you count the deferred deadline, filing deadline for the individual component of the tax, relatively speaking, it should be down in the 3 to 4% range. So again, it's holding steady, and with a little luck, we see that continue to increase. He did increase within the last week his estimates for this calendar year significantly, about $1.5 million. Taking a look at that, and I'll consider that as part of this. But as part of that request, I'm asking, and if you saw the article in the paper this last week, he requested that people consider filing, even though the deadline's not till July, early, or what would be regularly along the way. I think that's a wonderful request, but as part of that, in order to analyze the revenues coming in properly, I've asked him to break down and give me a percentage of the number of filers that he has received. In other words, if on April 1st or April 15th last year, that's considered 100%. What does he have now? Does he have 5%? Does he have 20%? And as we go through this, as we approach the July deadline,
Mommy? That's gotta be slow.
as we approach the July deadline, what percentage of those have come in? What percentage he'll have to take to collections? And what percentage have filed for an extension and related dates there? If he's able to provide that information, I should be able to zero in and give you an even better analysis of the data that I've requested. So I expect and hope that happens, and I'll share anything that I get with not only you, but the income tax board as well. Any questions for me on that item?
I do have a question for you. So Auditor Stashak forwarded to me the agreement with Julian and Grub.
Julian Group.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. For the annual city audit, just FYI, I'm signing that as the city council on council behalf. It's an agreement for them to come in and do the annual audit on, it costs $45,000. That's the estimate on it. Are there any, I mean, in reviewing the document, it looks appropriate, but I didn't know if anybody had any questions on our annual audit for,
I have a comment I'd like to share that it is an audit of us, but it is not our audit. The audit is done by an outside firm and is contracted by the state of Ohio, and they bill us for it. Now, the nice thing about them using a third-party private firm is when the state did our audit, I want to say 4 years ago now, it might have been 3, and I want to be careful how I say this, it was very expensive. It was closer to $70,000 than $40,000. So we save as a city from the bill we get from the state auditor tens of thousands of dollars by having a third-party firm contracted. Julian Group has a wonderful reputation, does a great job on behalf of the state in looking at the city's books, and provides good, strong management letter recommendations, which you folks will receive and have received in the past. And the goal is, and the mayor and I had a nice talk about this early on in the year, that when those recommendations come in, the idea is to clear them off the books where they're appropriate for the city. So yes, it does cost that kind of money, but there's nothing we can do about it because the state's going to bill us one way or the other, and I guarantee you, you want the third party in here, not the state.
Mr. Hellman.
Jim, the date you set for the meeting that you wanted?
Oh, it's your regular council meeting.
Oh, I thought you said
yes, the
day
first.
before.
Unfortunately, this year I have to have the revenues turned in to the county no later than July 21st. But July 21st doesn't coincide with your council schedule, so we have to have them passed, or July 20th. Excuse me, it's the day before. I can't remember, or 2 days before. It doesn't correspond correctly. So I need to have them passed or accepted the first meeting in July, and it's regular course of business. Their best estimates based on the information we have 18 months before we have the information. It's a statutory requirement, and the budget, they're turned into the Budget Commission, which is your county prosecutor, county treasurer, and county auditor, and they take a look, and it's a process we have to go through so that we could receive our local government money. If we don't go through this process, although we have an agreement with the county and the way it's apportioned has been predetermined, the Budget Commission has some discretion and can say, hey, they didn't follow these rules, and we could end up losing out on significant hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So the answer is July 7th.
It'll be, the public hearing would be before your meeting, first meeting in July.
Got it. Thank you. 6 o'clock.
Any other questions for the auditor? Hearing none. Any other new business? Ms. Mayor.
Just wanted to provide a couple of quick updates. I know we reviewed the Water and Sewer Committee report, but just wanted to make a couple comments to make sure you all were aware and looking at that. Obviously, over the last couple of years, that's kind of been an item of discussion, so I just wanted to draw your attention that at this point, the avenue we're pursuing or discussing and trying to gather more information to take to Water and Sewer is, at one point it was being discussed doing kind of a full-blown community update because of the concerns with the transmitters and going from 2G to 5G and a variety of topics, but at this point we feel like we've gotten a pretty good game plan to be able to do it over time, just as the transmitters failed and as meters failed, go through and replacing them, so that it's not a one huge expense. But certainly we'll continue to vet potential opportunities on that and take that through Water and Sewer Committee. But just wanted to make sure that you guys all see that and are paying attention to that, because I know that's been an item of discussion over the last couple of years. Another item I just wanted to mention, again, as we continue to look at finances, I hope the reports that I've been sharing with you all have been beneficial, and as the auditor mentioned, revenue continues to be strong, and if we get that information, and when we get that information from Andrew, we'll pass that along as well, so you guys all have the information that is appropriate. When we prepared our capital budget, we actually used revenue projections of about $23.5 million. So obviously that was significantly below what we kind of had budgeted overall for the community, but is actually right in line with what the auditor is projecting and Andrew's projecting right now. So that has been beneficial, and that does not then account for even the items that we have already said we will hold off on. So I just want to reiterate that we're continuing to pay attention and to cut back wherever we can and be wise fiscal stewards. Obviously, it has been an interesting couple of weeks as we've been dealing with COVID and continue to manage and support our community through these interesting times. And just when we are getting to kind of feel like we're maybe hitting a rhythm and getting a little bit back to normal, we have a terrible situation that has taken over and is permeating communities across the country. And hopefully you guys are all paying attention and saw that we have been very fortunate that the protesters that were voicing their frustrations in our community both yesterday and today, and I think we'll see over the next couple of weeks continuing to share their frustrations, have been carrying themselves in a way that makes me proud, being peaceful and voicing their frustrations, but also coming together and doing so in a respectful manner overall. Though we may not all agree on all things, I think that that's something that we can all agree on, is that we want people to be able to voice their opinions and be heard in our community and do it in a safe manner. A couple months ago, the Diversity Coalition and a couple of different groups in our community had reached out to me and said that they wanted to see a diversity, equality, and inclusion statement resolution adopted by City Council. And it was during kind of the beginnings of the COVID pandemic, and I said, I think we need to kind of hold off. We have some other things that we need to pay attention to right now. In hindsight, that was not appropriate of me. It is never, we should never put off making sure that people feel like they belong and are welcome in our community, no matter their backgrounds, beliefs, heritage, citizenship, sexual orientation, and a variety of things. And so I just wanted to give you all a heads up that most likely at our next council meeting, I'll probably reach out or circulate a draft that has been prepared by a large community group, a resolution that I would like for you all to consider that reaffirms our commitment as the city of Findlay that whether I agree with you or not, we have the same religion or not, that you are welcome here. And so I will be sharing that with you all, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that I think that that's an important statement, not only for us to make in this trying time, but really for us to make every single day when we step out of our doors, that people are welcome here. Today I had to work, over the last couple of weeks I've been closely monitoring the decision around fireworks for Independence Day. And this week heard from the Hancock County Agricultural Society that typically puts on our fireworks for Findlay Hancock County that they were not going to be able to do so. So I did release today that we won't be able to have fireworks, and I hate that. These are not the decisions that anyone wants to have to make. It's no fun to be the party pooper, and that's exactly what I am these days. But it obviously is just a time where we cannot have large congregations. I highly doubt that the mass gathering bans are going to be lifted by the 4th of July, when we typically have about 10,000 people coming to the fairgrounds to watch those. I know I've already seen the questions around why don't we just have them and not let people into the fairgrounds. Well, that is its own operational challenge. You still have people gather on the sides of the roads, you have people blocking traffic, we have an unsafe environment, and so we really just felt like it was the right decision at this point to not have those. We've had a lot of discussions, and if we come up with any genius ideas on how we can recognize that, I certainly am all ears. But I would just remind folks that the Independence Day holiday is not about fireworks. It is about recognizing that we are Americans and that we have that freedom because we fought, and that we have now established ourselves as a wonderful country, and we can be proud of that no matter what challenges we are facing. And so it may be disappointing, it may not be our normal festive celebration, but I know that each of us will find a new way to celebrate this year, and hopefully maybe later this year we can have a fireworks celebration, but we will certainly do so as soon as we are able to. And then of course, last but not least, the census is still going on. We are still ahead of the state of Ohio and most of the national averages, but still need folks to do it, so please make sure you continue to reiterate that message and share posts as we share them, and continue to share that throughout your channels. I believe that is my update. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Ms. Russell.
concerning the census, have we overtaken the state up north?
I don't think we have, but to be honest, I haven't paid a whole lot of attention this week, so maybe as of today. Any other questions or comments?
Hearing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work. Any other new business? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. So moved by Mr. Slough, second. Mr. Palmer, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned.
Well done, John.
Yeah, I messed up a couple times there.
Yeah. That's major.
Gee,
Kept
who
kept
did
Hellman
send
in line.
the minutes, the changes to the minutes? Was that?
Auditor Station.
I signed that as soon as you gave it to me.